Thank you very much for having us. We appreciate being here. As you said, my name is Neil Marshall. I'm the chairman of HealthSearch Partners. Have been doing executive search for basically just for hospitals and health systems for about 30 years.
And I'm Kurt Mosley. I'm the association practice leader at HealthSearch Partners. I started out in healthcare about 35 years in physician recruitment. Over the last 4 to 5 years, I've advanced into executive recruitment with Neil, working with HealthSearch Partners on various assignments across the country, involved in our thought leadership as well as our national speaking.
So for the last 30 years, we've been working with healthcare organizations on leadership transitions. Along the way, we've interviewed and worked with hundreds of healthcare CEOs and senior executives. And one nagging question kept coming up. Why do some leaders thrive in a new role while others struggle? Even when, let's say, both of them are talented and experienced. And what we discovered is that success often has less to do with strategy and more to do with what happens in these first 90 days. So today we're going to talk and share lessons from our Earned Authority series, where we've interviewed healthcare leaders about innovative tactics they've used during their first 90 days to help build trust, establish credibility, create momentum, and ultimately define their leadership legacy. Our hope is you'll leave with a few practical ideas you can use yourself, whether you're a CEO or a director or just someone who's aspiring to the next level of leadership. So let's begin by why this topic has never been more important than it is today.
Well, let's look at first of all, let's look at the current turnover landscape. We can't really look at this 90-day series, the Earned Authority, without looking at what's going on in current turnover. And this is CEO and all leadership throughout healthcare. And turnover is increasing. Why? Well, it's a challenge today. Hospital CEO increased 32% in Q1 2026 versus 2025, which is quite a jump. If you recall, back after the end of COVID, many of our leaders were planning on retiring, but wanted to weather the storm, ride out the storm in their ship and correct the ship before they moved on. But we're starting to see turnover increasing. And I think when you look at the number here, 41 hospital CEO departures reported in Q1 of this year. And we're obviously just on the edge of going into Q3, but that's a heck of a lot when you look at it. And when CEOs depart, so do their teams, a lot of cases. Their COOs, their CFOs, and sometimes their support staff leaves. So when one leader leaves, there's more involved than just replacing that one leader. And why? Well, I think most importantly, financial pressures. The one big beautiful bill. I'm not going to take any left or right. And somebody always asks me this when I do a presentation, are you on the left or the right? And I say, I'm not. I'm on the patient side. We're all going to be patient. So let's remember that. But it's certainly not helping the financial pressures and the reimbursement challenges. And most importantly, when Neil and I were at the ACHE meeting back in early spring in Houston, it was the CEOs we interviewed just casually were talking about the uncertainty of the future and the workforce shortages, both in leadership as well as physician shortages and nurse shortages are increasing that operational complexity, and they're accelerating turnover right now. And again, what are the costs? And I think we have to really look at that from a standpoint of what are the costs? Well, there's a financial cost to recruitment, interim coverage, and onboarding. I remember we had one CEO we helped relocate, and they didn't look closely at the contract before, and he was moving from one state to another, but he was bringing 24 Arabian horses with him. That was a big onboarding expense. So again, there's a lot of these things that we look at. We don't necessarily turn back the page and look underneath and find out what's going on. Lost momentum. Its strategic initiatives suffer. And workforce disruption, employee engagement, retention suffer. And I think that's really, really important to understand. So I'm going to go back, sorry. Research suggests a total cost of replacing a leader can go from 2 to 4 times the annual compensation, plus time lost replacing the leader. And the true cost of leadership turnover extends far beyond recruitment. It affects culture. We'll talk about culture today, performance, and long-term organizational success.
So Kurt and I have interviewed and worked with hundreds of executives over the years, and the leaders who succeeded in their first 90 days aren't necessarily the smartest and the most experienced or even the most decisive. What separated them was that they resist the urge to prove themselves immediately, and instead they spend their early days listening, learning, building relationships, and earning trust before they try to drive major change. One thing that surprised me in this series was that some of the most successful CEOs didn't start with strategy. They started with the people. They understand that before employees buy into your plan, they have to buy into you. So what are they doing differently? They're listening first and learning the culture before they're implementing change. They're building trust and credibility with all the different stakeholders. They're focusing on meaningful early wins, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Wins that create momentum. And they're going to align their actions with their word to earn authority and long-term support. So the purpose of this first 90 days. So a few years ago, Kurt and I began asking a simple question. I mean, we place leaders for a living, but what really determines whether they're successful? We interviewed CEO after CEO, expecting to hear about strategic plans or financial turnarounds or all of this. And we just kept hearing stories about the first 90 days. Stories about stepping into hospitals, working night shifts, sleeping in the hospitals, picking up trash, eating in the physician lounges. And that's what led us to create this Earned Authority series. We wanted to capture these practical, real world tactics and then share them with healthcare leaders because the first 90 days are often the most important days of your tenure. They're going to set the tone, establish trust, create the momentum, and ultimately determine whether a leader earns the authority and is able to go beyond the title. One of the more interesting ones, and I didn't realize that I was walking my dog one day, and all of a sudden it popped into my head that my first job, which wasn't even in healthcare, I was a executive trainee for an organization, and there were like 5 of us trainees, and they had fired our CEO. And so the new CEO was going to start the next that morning, and we were all looking out the window waiting for the CEO to arrive. And he drove up into the parking lot. He got out of his car. He walked the parking lot and he picked up garbage. And came into the warehouse, threw all the garbage away, never said a word about the garbage, never said anything, and then came and introduced himself. Well, that was the last day that Grover Martin ever picked up a piece of garbage again, because we all got there 15 minutes early and we picked up the garbage because we didn't want him doing it. But what he was symbolizing, he used a symbolic act to show us what that it was different, that things were different, and that the being a C- place was not going to be appropriate anymore. We needed to be an A place, and we did that by starting with the garbage.
And why we wanted to put this together was really to inspire and inform healthcare leaders. Because when Neil and I went in this project, we were talking about Grover Martin. We were talking about a lot of the CEOs we interviewed. We were expecting to uncover 100 different ideas. But what surprised us is how many leaders shared the same core themes. And again, in some ways, I expected there'd be more variation, but there wasn't. And the reason why is we wanted to really highlight practical, high impact tactics for new executives to navigate leadership transitions. Because there's a lot of books out there, but there's not a lot of real world stories. And that's what we are. We're storytellers. And again, promote strategic onboarding. We believe as a company that once we have a candidate placed and the contract signed, our job's only half over. We have to make sure that that person's onboarded and they're successful. Because if they're successful, we're successful. And we take them to make sure they understand the culture of the new hospital. I think it's very important. I always say culture is a multiplier, and people say, "What are you talking about? Culture is a multiplier." You can do 10 great things during your first 90 days, but you goof up on culture, and those 10 things will be negated. And also encouraging frontline engagement, how to do that, and to talk about, as Neil mentioned, early wins. And again, we wanted to bridge this leadership theory outside of what are around in books with real world practices through these actual case studies that we're going to share with you today. And at the end, we'll tell you how you can get a hold of all of our case studies. But our goal was to promote the importance of strategic onboarding because we believe that our work is only half done. And again, we wanted to, over the course of this work, we've collected more than 20 case studies that consistently reinforce the same lesson. Authority is not granted by title alone.
So one of the biggest lessons that we learned from the series is that there are actually two moments when a leader receives authority. The first happens when the board or the hiring authority hires you and gives you that title, right? The second, and more important, is when the people you lead decide they trust you, they believe in you, and they're willing to follow you. The first kind of authority comes with the job, but the second has to be earned. And the leaders who are most successful understand that the first 90 days are really about earning that second kind of authority. That's why we call the series Earned Authority. The title's going to get you in the door, but trust, credibility, and influence are what are going to determine whether you're going to be successful once you get there. Back to my first boss, Grover. He didn't just pick up garbage. He ended up being so popular and we loved him so much. I'll never forget a time he was walking through the office and we were in kind of a bullpen. It was an inside sales type situation. And whenever the phone rang, somebody would pick up the phone and take the order. And Grover was walking by and one of the phones was ringing and we weren't paying attention. And Grover walked over, picked up the phone, said, "Grover Martin, Ferguson Enterprises, how can I help you?" And that was the last time that Grover ever answered a phone in the bullpen. From then on, if the phone was ringing, folks were jumping across desks to make sure that Grover didn't answer that phone. He had earned our respect and he had earned the right to lead us. So back to beyond the title, authority comes with the position, but trust is earned through the behavior by listening first, learning the culture, and understand before you act, build relationships before launching major initiatives, and then credibility in the first 90 days creates momentum for long-term success.
And what's earned authority in action? Well, we always want to talk about making sure your audio matches your visual. What do I mean by that? Well, making sure what you say and your actions are in correlation. My father gave me advice years ago, and he told me, he said, "Kurt, it's hard to talk your way out of something you behave yourself into." And we always caution our leaders to make sure that they understand that. Because again, you want to create early wins for somebody else that makes sense. And don't forget, you're on stage. When we look at one CEO that we talked to, he was charged with coming up with a new strategic plan. And he was walking the floors and he was talking to the nurse manager. And she came up to him and said, "I heard you're working on a new strategic plan." He said, "Yes, I am." And this is what we call earned authority in action. And she said, "May I make a suggestion?" He said, "Absolutely." She goes, "We don't need a new strategic plan. We just need IV pumps that work for our patients." And again, that was something from a standpoint of what people watch, what leaders do, and not what leaders say. I always like to use John Wooden. He was a UCLA basketball coach, Hall of Famer, one of the most successful basketball coaches in NCAA history. But he used a quote with his team, and the quote was "Be quick, but don't hurry." And I love using that. And people say, "Expand on that," and I'd be glad to. And it's really understanding what needs to change before you change it. Make sure you understand the culture before you earn the right to change it. And again, it's not this, it's sort of acting quickly to learn, but moving deliberately to change. And people say, well, I don't want to slow down to my first 90 days. No, you're not slowing down. You're just sequencing your speed. So your speed keeps up with your decision making.
The next thing we're going to talk about is the power of symbolic acts. One of the biggest surprises from all of our interviews was the stories that people remembered years later were rarely about budgets or organization charts or strategic plans. What they remembered were the symbolic acts. A leader picking up trash in the parking lot like Grover, a CEO showing up in the ED at midnight, a leader answering a ringing phone when nobody else would. Um, None of those actions change the organization by themselves, but what they did and do is they send a message. Employees are always watching a new leader. They're trying to figure out what's important, what behaviors are valued, what kind of person has just taken over the helm. In those early days, every action communicates culture. One lesson came through over and over again in our interviews is that one symbolic move can do more than 100 emails in moving the needle. The leaders who were the most successful understood that they were always on stage. They knew people would pay far more attention to what they did than what they said. So the question for every new leader is simple. What are you signaling? You don't announce culture, you demonstrate it. We had one CEO who, during the interview process, it was very apparent that the emergency department was broken. And everybody talked about that they couldn't fix the emergency department and the emergency department was broken. And he said, okay. So on his first day, he moved his office down into the emergency department and was there to help in any way he could. And he signaled how important the emergency department was. And within a 3 to 6 month period, they had turned it around, and it was back going well again. So, power of symbolic acts. Small actions communicate more than formal speeches. Visible behaviors demonstrate priority and organizational values. Symbolic acts are going to build trust, credibility, connection, um, and that rounding and doing things like that are incredibly important symbolically to the employees.
So let's look at this from the standpoint of the first 90 days. Let's break it down into a 30-day section. So the first 90 days uh, complete, if you look at the first 30, what do you do during that time? Well, you listen, you learn, and you build trust. I know these are basics, but during that time, you really need to decide what you want the organization to be talking about you 5 years from now. And during that time, you're going to create behaviors that enforce that vision. And most importantly, we talk to our council, our CEOs that we help relocate, is that the first 90 days aren't proving about what you know, they're proving you're listening and learning, and you're asking questions. And how do you do that? Well, conducting stakeholder interviews, very important. We're going to talk about a couple of CEOs that do that, that did that quite effectively. Observe the culture before you make changes. Understand it. Um, Communicate, as I mentioned earlier, that you're here to learn. And building key stakeholder relationships, both internal and external. Hospitals in many communities, as we all know, are the number one or two employer in town. Get to know the people in town, get to know the businesses, the churches, the schools. And again, building those relationships. There's a great book out there. It's called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And establishing those relationships before you need to ask something for help or guidance in those relationships. And it's very important during that first 30 days to really put your feet on the ground and get set in the right direction.
So the second 30 days, day 61 to 31 to 60, the first 30 days are about learning. The next 30 days are about trying to make sense with what you've learned. By this point, you've met the people, you've walked the floors, listened to physicians, employees, board members, community leaders. Patterns begin to emerge. You start to understand what's working, what's not, where the opportunities are, and where the landmines are. This is the stage where successful leaders begin separating symptoms from root causes. They validate the assumptions, challenge the conventional wisdoms, and start aligning the organization around a few key priorities. Notice I didn't say launch 10 initiatives. The best CEOs we interviewed showed remarkable restraint. They narrowed focus, built alignment, and made sure the organization knew where they were headed before they started moving. So while the first 30 days help you understand the organization, the second 30 help the organization understand where you're going. One of our CEOs, Shane Cerrone, he was CEO at Beaumont Health up in Detroit. Top decile in almost every indicator, financial, quality indicator. And he said whenever he walked into a new place, everybody that he met with in his early rounding, he would ask, who are the 5 most important physicians? Who are the 5? And he asked everybody, and he got a very clear picture on who the most important physicians to the organization were. Those he tried to engage them and make sure that he engaged them in either an executive leadership position or on a board or something, to engage them and help them and show them how important they were.
So during this time, you got 60 days sort of behind you, 61 to 90. If it's possible, if you can do it, start developing early wins. And what do we mean by that? Well, we've even had people say, well, how early is early? Well, we've had CEOs start even before they started their careers, go to the board. One CEO we talked about, Matt Fry, he did a pre-arrival learning series where he went to the hospital. He had a suit on, but he didn't announce himself. But he walked around 2 weeks prior to his assignment, and he found signage that was wrong. He found dead landscape, cluttered hallways. There was security ED concerns. I mean, people were getting into the ED without security checks, and he changed it right away. It was a visible win. Jay Robinson, who we're going to talk about a little later, he was walking through the hospital and he consulted with his lab manager, and the lab manager asked him to move some of the equipment around to improve turnaround time, and he approved it on the spot. That was an early win, which proved his employees he listened, he learned, and within a couple of months, the turnaround time had improved dramatically, almost 50%. So again, how do you do that? Well, by small visible victories that build credibility. They reinforce the vision and the values of what you're trying to do. They set the stage for your long-term strategy. People see in the first 90 days what you've done. They can see long-term. They can see that vision. They can see where you're going without having to tell them. And the first 90 days is a blueprint for foundation for long-term success. And most importantly, as we talk about, they're an authority, your legacy.
So let's talk about quick wins versus strategic moves. One of the biggest mistakes that new leaders make is believing they have to solve the organization's biggest problems immediately. The reality is that during the first 90 days, your goal is not to complete a strategic plan. Your goal is to build credibility, build momentum, because that's where the quick wins come in. A quick win doesn't have to be a big win. It just has to be visible. Fix a broken process, improve signage, address a long-standing employee frustration. That's a huge one. They may seem small, but they demonstrate that you're listening and that action follows feedback. The best leaders use the quick wins to earn the right to make the strategic moves later. So again, it's not necessarily a big win, but it's a visible win. So we're going to transition now. And one of the best examples of a leader creating both credibility and a quick win comes from a gentleman by the name of Richard Parks. And Richard was actually the person inadvertently who got the whole 90-day series started. Kurt and I were interviewing him one day, and it was on a different subject. We were discussing no confidence votes. There had been a no confidence vote in his hospital before he got there, which was one of the reasons he was the new CEO there. And so we were talking about that. And he said, well, Neil, whenever I go into a new situation, a new hospital, and this was Covenant Health System in Lubbock, Texas, 22 hospitals, $7 billion in revenue. I mean, it's a significant place. He said, my wife stays home and she sells the house, gets kids ready for sale, gets the kids ready to move. And I move into the hospital. And Kurt and I look at each other and we kind of give each other the side eye. And we're like, yes, Richard, everybody works really hard their first 90 days. And he said, no. He said, I moved into the hospital and I lived there for the first 90 days. And listen, I've interviewed 10,000 hospital executives in my career. I'd never heard anything like that before in my life. So I said, Richard, talk to us more about it. What happened because of that? He said, woke up the next morning and the residents were making coffee. And so he said, Neil, like all old people do, I asked them how they slept. And one of them popped up. He said, slept horribly. The mattresses in the residence dorm are horrible. And Richard said, you know what? He said, I know somebody that can fix that. And he called the VP of facilities on his first day and he said, hey, we're going to Costco. We're replacing every mattress in the residence dorm today. We need 5 pickup trucks and we're going. And he went with them, got all new mattresses. And he said, Neil, he said, it costs, I don't know what it was, $3,000 or something. He said, people talked about that and the fact that I lived in the hospital for the first 90 days. He said, my last day, 7 years later, people were still bringing that up. And that was the story that started everything.
We had another gentleman we interviewed, Jim Decker, and he talked about the 25-50-25 rule, which I'll talk about, which I was right when I heard that, I said, oh, I got to hear this. But Jim spent about 50 years in healthcare leadership, and then he turned off as author and he became a leadership coach. But he refined this deceptively simple framework to guide leaders through early transitions. Okay, and what was that? Well, he called it the 25-50-25 rule. And he explained to me, he said, Kurt, 25% are early adapters. I go, what do you mean by early adapters? He said, well, they're the ones that are with you. They're the ones that will follow you because you're the new leader. He goes, and they're going to be on your side from day one. But then he said, you got to watch out for the middle. 50% of those are undecided. And I said, okay, all right, I get it. And then he said, they're on the fence right now. And he said, what you need to do is understand why they're on the fence. Maybe, go into some of their backgrounds, interview them, talk to them. But then he also said, listen, there's 25% of these people that are resistors. They're not going to ever be on your side. And then again, what was his goal? Well, he said, what we have to do is empower the 25%, the ones that are on your side, and have them help you. And maybe, win over the middle 50%. Then you'll have 75%. You'll have a majority. And I said, well, what do you do with the other 25%? He goes, well, not that you want to ignore them, but you don't want to waste time on resistors. He goes, because you have too much to do during that time. You have to establish yourself. You have to gain the credibility. You have to earn the right to make decisions. And he said, there's really, really nothing scientific about this, but it's worked in every organization I've led. He led 3 organizations over that 50 years. So it's a great story. And he wrote a great book. If you're interested more in Jim Decker, he wrote a book called Reviving the Heart of Leadership. It was about all these studies are in there. But what was also unique is some of Jim's innovative tactics. And again, his main goal, as I mentioned earlier, was to get the middleists watching. So he said, so win them early in that first 90 days. And he said, successful leaders balance listening, visibility, and action during their first 90 days. And I think one of the things I liked, he recognized that cultural sensitivities. First physician meeting he wanted to impress everybody. So he was telling Neil and I that he said, I went to Dunkin' Donuts because it just opened in town. I got a whole spread of donuts because I said, I was told that the physicians like donuts. So he came in with the donuts and he looked at the doctors and some were picking around at him or looking at him. And they kind of had an odd look on their face. And he said, I didn't know at the time, but they'd used the same baker in that hospital for the last 20 years. And the baker was actually one of the donors to the hospital. And they had their favorites. And again, he realized that he made that cultural mistake. And how do you use visible changes to signal that? Well, he admitted his mistake. He went to the baker and said, I really goofed up. And the baker said, yeah, I've been doing the donuts for the last 20 years. But Jim went one step further. He said, I'm going to understand your culture. And he said, who likes what? The next meeting, he showed up with the donuts from the baker, all the favorites, and he distributed them to the people. He said, well, this doctor likes this donut, and this doctor likes a cruller. This one likes the glazed donuts. So he used these changes. And he told me one time, he said, this was a crisis, but he said, Kurt, never let a good crisis go to waste. He goes, I corrected it and built credibility during that time. And then he also used those same techniques when he balanced the financial responsibility with empathy and compassion. There were some financial issues, but he used the same techniques. At the start, there was 25% were on his side, 50% were in the middle, and he convinced those to help show them, I understand what you're trying to change. I have compassion for it, but let's all get on board. And he got everybody on his side during his tenure. And he moved the middle, most importantly, in every move he made to drive organizational transformation. He said, every challenge I had to figure out who was in the middle and how can I change it? How can I get him over to my side?
So our third case study, Ray Montgomery, literally just wrote this one. I think we published it this week. Ray was a guy that I had known in the business for 20 plus years. One of my favorite small hospital CEOs. But we were up there. Ray had retired about 5 years before. They had brought in a new CEO. After about 4 or 5 years, it wasn't working out. He left. And we were doing the search to replace Ray's replacement. But Ray was the interim while we were there. And we were going to meet with the search committee, and we were in administration. And search committee we were meeting at way on the other side of the hospital. So Ray and I, he was going to help me get there. So we were walking, and we don't get 15 feet from administration. And somebody stops. Oh, Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Ray, good to see you. So we have to stop and talk to him. And we talk for, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes. And I'm kind of getting antsy, but Ray's talking to him. And then we're done and we're on. We don't get more than 15 feet down the road. Somebody else, oh, Mr. Ray, so good to see you. So we talked to that person, and he knew everybody and he knew everything about everybody. So then we finished with the second one. We are walking down the hall, and there's a transporter pushing a patient. The transporter doesn't say anything, but the patient pops up and says, Mr. Ray, so good to see you. Well, good to see you. I'm glad you're back. So after that was done, I asked Ray, I said, Ray, how do you get anywhere in the hospital? But talking, and he said, Neil, I leave 15 minutes early. If I'm walking through if I've got to go through the hospital, I leave 15 minutes early and I build it into my day because these are my people and I'm going to talk to all of them. The second one, the second story in the race series was, so we were doing a search committee interview. So the search committee was meeting with the candidates, and we had 2 candidates, and then we broke for dinner. And I was with the search committee, and we had dinner there in the committee room. And then when we were done, we were just chit chatting, and Ray got up and started bussing the table. And I kind of felt bad. I was like, oh, I can't let the CEO be bussing the table. So I hopped up. Everybody else just kept talking. There were probably 10 people in the room, huge table, everybody. So Ray and I bussed. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. Well, the next morning we had 2 other candidates that interviewed. And in between, we had breakfast. And I'll be darned if after breakfast, Ray didn't get up and start bussing the table. And I just realized that was just who Ray was. Ray was going to be of service no matter what. And he was servicing his employees, his board members, the people that were on the search committee, and even the people that were in dietary, because he cleaned everything up for them. But that's who he was. He was a true servant leader.
Our third case study was Jay Robinson, and he shared with us a lot of key leadership practices that he used. He's a CEO in Northern California for Kaiser Permanente. And one of the things I thought was really unique about Ray is he interviewed 242 different individuals during his first 90 days. And most importantly, he met with them, but he met with them on their ground, whether it was in their office or if it was in dietary, it was in the cafeteria, or if it was in maintenance, it was in their office. And he focused on listening before leading and understanding. So I think that was really important. And Ray told us, he goes, the fastest way to gain credibility, is not by telling people what you know, but sharing with them you value what they know. And he took that summary of those 242 individuals and he said what success looks like for each leader. And I think most importantly, when you look at his notes, he also surfaced a lot of operational challenges. And what he said was, in these meet and greets, he said to each and every individual, if we're successful in the first 90 days, what is going to be different? What will be different? And he said, seeing people in their own environment revealed so much more than what they would come up with in a group meeting. It was just one-on-one with them. And hundreds, like I said, 242 of these. And he identified and he acted on these frontline operational improvement ideas that eventually enhanced efficiency in patient care. And he got that through all the summary of these 242 people he interviewed. And he demonstrated responsiveness by addressing employee concerns. And also, most importantly, he led his other leaders to look at how they're engaging with their own staff. And that was one of the Ray's key. By his behavior, his other leaders started doing the same thing, meeting with their direct reports in their offices, talking to them. And most importantly, he took the insights and recurring themes and focused it into his strategic plan that he presented to the board after his first 90 days. And it became the operational excellence framework for his tenure at that facility. Just want to talk a little bit about our 90-day thought leadership series, why we did it again, and why we wanted to publish them. Mainly because they capture the real world lessons from successful healthcare leaders. And they help others thrive when it matters most during that first 90 days. And our articles really highlight how trust, culture, and leadership drive long-term success. And lastly, they help current and aspiring leaders to avoid common mistakes and accelerate their impact. You can access those articles. If you look at the QR code on the page, you can access it with your phone. It'll take you right to our website, and you can see all the 4 people that we talked about today, plus 17 others in these different leadership articles that we hope you'll find helpful.
So, as we've talked about, what we've kind of learned through all of this is that the leaders who are most successful don't spend the first 90 days trying to prove they deserve the job. They spend the first 90 days proving they understand the people and the culture and getting to understand that and the mission that they have been entrusted to lead. The title gives you the authority on day one, But trust, credibility, and influence are earned one conversation, one decision, and one action at a time. Employees are going to forget what you say, most of what you say in the first 90 days, but they'll never forget how you showed up. So if you're stepping into a new leadership role, remember this: listen before you lead, learn before you change, and build trust before you ask people to follow. Because leadership isn't granted by a title, leadership is earned.